Good morning and welcome to another edition of the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. This week, as we move closer to one of the worst anniversaries in U.S. history, the January 6th insurrection, we are learning much more about the complicity of former President Donald Trump and how his closest allies, including his friends at Fox News and his own son, Don Jr., urged the outgoing president to make a statement and end the riot at the U.S. Capitol. Trump did nothing. The burning question now is, will anyone have the guts to pursue criminal charges against Trump, who appears to have committed the most heinous crime against a government, treason? We discussed this morning, but first, let's check out the headlines for this morning, Wednesday, December 15th, 2021. D.C. Attorney General Karl Racine on Tuesday sued the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers over the January 6th attack on Congress. Let's take a listen to what the Attorney General had to say.
Speak truth through this filing, through this complaint, through this case. It is for these reasons that the independent Office of Attorney General for the District of Columbia is filing the first civil lawsuit by a state or municipal government to hold accountable the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and more than 30 of their leaders and members for conspiring to terrorize the District of Columbia, for unlawfully interfering with our country's peaceful transition of power, and for assaulting our men and women in blue who valiantly defended the Capitol, the district, and our freedoms.
Yeah, Attorney General Racine is seeking to use a law written to cripple the Ku Klux Klan to exact stiff financial penalties from the far-right groups that he alleges were responsible for the violence. The lawsuit filed in federal court in D.C. cites the modern version of an 1871 law known as the Ku Klux Klan Act, which was enacted after the Civil War to safeguard government officials carrying out their duties and protect civil rights. Two similar suits have been filed already this year related to January 6th, one by Representative Benny Thompson of Mississippi, the chair of the House Homeland Security Committee, and another by a number of police officers who fought the rioters that day. So that's one that we will continue to watch and see what unfolds there as D.C. Attorney General Karl Racine takes on the Proud Boys. Now let's bring on the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, Dr. Benjamin F. Chavis Jr. Dr. Chavis, good morning.
Good morning, Stacy. How are you? And on behalf of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, this is another Wednesday morning edition of the Let It Be Known. We thank you so much on behalf of Karen Carter Richards, our chair of the NNPA. We represent 230 African-American owned newspapers and media companies across the country.
Dr. Chavis, also in the news this morning, the filibuster, months-long talks among Democrats in Congress about how to pass voting rights legislation over Republican objections are getting more serious and more urgent, according to several reports this week, as Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer seeks to pass major legislation before the end of the month. We know early this morning, one major measure was passed, and that was raising the debt ceiling. It drew out all night long, but it got done, and it will be on President Biden's desk later this week to sign to keep the government from defaulting on loans through 2023. Representative James Clyburn, speaking about the filibuster, Dr. Chavis, he said, we had better come up with some way to get around it. He has warned his Democratic colleagues to do something because this democracy is teetering on collapse, he said. Democrats want to pass a voting rights bill before the end of the year when it might be too late to make changes to how elections in key states are run for the 2020 midterm. The biggest Democratic opponent to weakening the filibuster, of course, is Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. But reports suggest that on Tuesday, Manchin was to meet with a group of moderate Democratic senators. We don't have information from that meeting from yesterday, but they wanted to gauge his openness to tweaking the filibuster so Democrats can pass a voting rights bill. So we see some action, at least, Dr. Chavis.
Absolutely. And actually, Senator Manchin is on record saying he supports voting rights. So the question is not whether or not he supports voting rights, but whether or not he's willing to alter the current repressive filibuster rule. That's the issue. And I think that hopefully the meeting yesterday was successful. I know also he's going to be meeting again with President Biden before these votes. So we'll see what will happen. But voting rights is key to Black America. Voting rights is key to communities of color. And voting rights is key to our democracy. I think what Representative Clapper said is accurate. You know, what's at stake right now is the democracy. The American democracy itself is at stake right now.
Yeah, Dr. Chavis, also in the news, the U.S. Treasury Department announced Tuesday the release of $8.7 billion to help increase lending to small and minority-owned businesses and people living in poor communities with limited access to banking. The funds from the Emergency Capital Investment Program, which was created this year, will go to 186 community-based financial institutions. Vice President Kamala Harris and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen discussed the investments in remarks at the Freedmen's Bank Forum, which was hosted by the Treasury Department. The wealth gap persists today. The homeownership gap persists today, the vice president said, of the need for the investment. She said Black entrepreneurs are 3 times more likely to report that a lack of access to capital negatively affects their profit margins. And Janet Yellen stressed that there would be a direct link between the money being provided in businesses and local communities, saying that she recently met the owner of a tea company in Atlanta called Just Add Honey, who lacked the financial credit to keep all her shops open during the pandemic. Of course, Black Americans represent 13.4% of the U.S. population, yet Federal Reserve figures show they control only 4.3% of household wealth. So this is another move by the vice president, by the president, to right centuries-old wrong, Dr. Chavis.
Absolutely. And we want to give a special shout out this morning to Congresswoman Maxine Waters, who was at that meeting yesterday. And as you know, Maxine Waters chairs the House Finance Committee, a very powerful committee. And Maxine Waters was one of the members of Congress pushing the Treasury Department to do what it did yesterday. And of course, this is another indication of the Biden-Harris administration striving to keep their promises to Black America.
Yeah, and also Dr. Chavis, in the news this morning, Heisman Trophy winner Bryce Young. He isn't even eligible for the 2022 NFL draft, but his gridiron achievements certainly are professional worthy. The Alabama quarterback became the 5th sophomore to win the Heisman Trophy, college football's most outstanding player award. Just 20 years old, he becomes the first Crimson Tide quarterback to win the award, and it marks the 2nd consecutive year an Alabama player has won the Heisman. He says, I've always been labeled as someone who's not the prototype, being an African-American quarterback and being, quote unquote, undersized and not being that prototype. I've always been ruled out and counted out. Well, there's no denying Mr. Young this morning, Dr. Chavis.
Absolutely. He's not only counted in, he's saluted. And I want to thank you, Stacey, for the excellent article that you have about Bryce Young now on the NNPA Wire Service as well as blackpressusa.com. Hope everybody will check it out. It's an extensive piece written by Stacey Brown yesterday about Bryce Young. On behalf of the NNPA, we salute and we congratulate the new Heisman Trophy winner, Bryce Young.
Yeah, Bryce threw for 4,300 yards this season, a 68% completion rate as well. He passed for 43 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions, and his passer rating, if anybody knows anything about football and passer ratings, well, it doesn't get any better than this, 175.5. Plus, he led Alabama to a 12-1 record, including an explosive 41-24 victory over the #1 ranked Georgia in the SEC championship. He broke the single game passing record, 559 yards against Arkansas, and he shattered SEC championship record for total offense and passing yards after throwing for 421 yards and 3 touchdowns during that event. So congratulations again to Bryce Young.
Stacey, I was in Georgia the day of that game between Georgia and Alabama, and you should have seen all the people came out of the woodwork, just knew that Georgia was going to win. When this black quarterback hit the field, it turned the tide. That's why it was Crimson Tide. It was Bryce Young Tide. And, you know, again, and what we say in the NMPA piece that's on the Y service now, Bryce Young epitomizes the talent and the genius and the striving for excellence of black athletes in all sports. So I hope that a lot of young people will be inspired in our communities by the example of young Bryce Young.
Yeah, and Dr. Chavis, this morning, the evidence continues to mount in the January 6th Commission. And now we come to find out the role of former President Donald Trump. The question is, why isn't he in jail? Let's watch a little bit of this. Let's just check out this clip here.
When action by our president was required, essential, and indeed compelled by his oath to our Constitution. Mr. Meadows received numerous text messages, which he has produced without any privilege claim, imploring that Mr. Trump take the specific action we all knew his duty required. These text messages leave no doubt the White House knew exactly what was happening here at the Capitol. Members of Congress, the press, and others wrote to Mark Meadows as the attack was underway. One text Mr. Meadows received said, quote, "We are under siege here at the Capitol." Another, quote, "They have breached the Capitol." In a third, Mark, protesters are literally storming the Capitol, breaking windows on doors, rushing in. Is Trump going to say something?
Is he going to say something? No, he didn't say anything. Let's talk about it. Should he be in jail? This is an act of treason. Let's bring on our guest this morning from the Texas Metro News, publisher Cheryl Smith, and of course, James Wright of the Washington Informer. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Cheryl. Good morning, James.
So I'm gonna start ladies first. Cheryl Smith, it's always great to see you. I want your take on this. You know, we see now more and more. Even Don Jr. had urged his father, do something, say something, stop this riot, and Trump refused. All of this is now coming out in this January 6th commission. Many people, Cheryl Smith, had first said, you know, this is a waste of time. It's just wrong focus. But now we see why it's not a waste of time.
Well, we've always known it wasn't a waste of time, but though you still have those folks, and there are a lot of them. There are a lot of them who believe in Trump. And here, you know, I'm interested in seeing what his daughter, what her text messages look like, because I've talked to a number of people and they've been surprised that Donald Jr. actually said anything, because he has been towing the line for so long. But we've known, and you unpacked so many things today, and this, I would have loved to have gotten in on a Bryce Young conversation, because it was great to see his family. And I want to give a shout out also to his family. And also I want to give another shout out before I go back to Trump, and just say a shout out to Deion Sanders, who received the Eddie Robinson Award. And I know that Dr. Chavis and all of you know the wonderful Coach Rob. And I think of men like him, because there was a time when coaches were respected and feared. And I see that coming back with Deion Sanders, because he expects his players to act a certain way. And that is really important, because they have to have character on the field and off the field. And speaking, that takes me back to character, because we see what kind of character Donald Trump is. And if we think if you just watch what is happening, that's why the Black press is so important. And I was going through a bunch of your stories, Stacey, last night also, because we're on deadline. And that's why we're so important, because we get it right, because the mainstream, the so-called mainstream, has been getting it totally wrong. And they have been complicit in many ways in perpetuating the lie of the Trump administration. And it is definitely a big lie. Donald Trump was celebrating that day when other folks in their right mind were terrorized.
We also remember too, James, that the vice president, I mean, everyone, you had Speaker Pelosi, everyone else in that building, but the vice president, his vice president was in that building,
Yes.
and Trump stood by and
Yes.
watched it basically burn.
Stacey, I want to get to Cheryl's point in terms of loyalty and of reason. No president has had a more loyal vice president than Trump did with Mike Pence. I mean, Mike Pence was just right there with him in terms of everything. And what does Donald Trump do? Basically throw him under the bus. To get to your central point, the president of the United States committed treason. I like to consider myself an amateur presidential historian. No president, not even Richard Nixon, went to the levels that Donald Trump did in terms of protecting the country, in terms of not protecting the country, I should say, and in terms of breaking the law. Now, the mainstream media is complicit, I think, to a great degree in terms of not calling out Trump for breaking the law, and not just federal law, but district laws in terms of protecting the Capitol and the people. He is supposed to protect the American people. He's the commander in chief. He did not act.
Yeah, he did not act. But, again, and I guess, Dr. Chavis, the underlying question is, we saw earlier in the clip the DC Attorney General announcing that he's going after the Proud Boys. But will anyone really have the guts to go after the former president?
Yes. And I think I've known Benny Thompson for many, many years. He's a civil rights leader, a civil rights activist. Now he's a member of Congress from the state of Mississippi, and he's chairing the House Select Committee. If anybody knows Benny Thompson, this brother has the courage to do what is necessary. And I think James and Cheryl are right. This is worse than Watergate. We have not had this kind of treason by a sitting president of the United States ever in the history of America. And this is worse than those southern states that seceded from the Union and decided to attack the Union in the Civil War. So I think that, the battle lines have been drawn. And I think that, we're going to be, 2022 is a year coming now that is going to test the soul of America. Mm-hmm. It's going to test the willingness of Black America and other communities of color. We have to rise up and defeat these voter suppression laws. We have to rise up and vote some of these judges out of office, vote some of these congressmen out of office, vote some of these senators out of office. 2022 has got to be a payback year. We cannot, what happened on January the 6th, 2021 needs to be reckoned in throughout the year of 2022. And that's what's going on right now in the House of Congress or the Senate. And I think that we got to roll up our sleeves. A great fight is getting ready to happen.
Yeah, and Cheryl, what does it say that right now all polling shows that the leading Republican candidate for president in 2024 is none other than Donald Trump?
What does it say? What does it say? Are people listening and hearing this? Because we're looking at midterm elections, Dr. Chavis just mentioned, and yes. We just, Monday was the filing deadline. And I'm looking in Texas because Texas is always at the forefront of stupidity. I think that's the best thing I can say right now. And we're looking at, there just has to be a mindset. Something has to change. And I don't know why why Democrats have a hard time pulling through with the fight, finishing the fight, hitting those punches. It seems like Democrats want to be right, Republicans want to win, and they do anything to win. And they are really hurting. And we're looking at redistricting. We already see what happened. We could blame the numbers and the census on COVID. We could blame it on a number of things. But if we don't get out, and you said, Dr. Chavis, talking about that important vote, if we don't get out the vote in these midterm elections, it will be even easier for Trump to get back in
That's
2024.
Right. That's
because all bets are off. Even the candidates who are not on the ballot need to be doing everything they can to raise those numbers. We have people in Texas, lawsuits have been filed. A number of them have been filed. You have people who have spent money and now they've been drawn out of districts where you have all the Black folks competing against one another. You have Republican seats and safe, and even folks are getting scared already and saying, okay, we have to make sure we protect, those who are of Mexicans, Latinos that we support. We need to support right. That's what we need to do. We need to support right, and we need to make sure that we get the vote out, because that is what the Republicans are afraid of. If we let them keep butchering our vice president, and that is happening tremendously. When you look at the turnover in her administration versus Trump's administration, turnovers happen.
Yeah.
And people are there for a season. But we, the Black press, we have to do a better job of trying to balance out the mess that mainstream media continues to perpetuate, because he still has his supporters. Yes, you see that people behind closed doors and behind Texas. And this is really funny, James. I know you get this. That we're always talking to our young people about watch what you text, watch what you post. And you're talking about chickens coming home to roost. They're coming home. It's just a matter of if they are going to be cooked, or are we just going to let them ride off into the sunset?
Well, it's interesting too, because we played the video there. That was a Republican, by the way, Liz Cheney,
right,
who took the lead in this. She has been unafraid, but she's been out there like the Lone Ranger from the Republican Party, though, James.
True. Yes, she has. As a matter of fact, the interesting thing about Liz Cheney is that the first vote to impeach Donald Trump, she voted against it. But after this January 6th incident and the refusal to acknowledge the loss, and Liz Cheney, the daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney, decided to go ahead and do the right thing as far as the Republicans were concerned and speak out against Trump. And as you know, Stacey and Dr. Chavis and Cheryl, she lost the chairmanship of the House Republican Conference because of that. And that's what we need now. We need Republicans to be more courageous to speak out against this criminal ex-president and to make sure that he does not get the nomination should he decide to run. I do want to make a quick point about redistricting in Texas that Cheryl alluded to. She talked about packing in terms of the Blacks being pitted against each other. I'm from Austin, and let me tell you what the Texas legislature did. They created a Travis County only district. And that is packing too, not in terms of racial, in terms of race, but in terms of political ideology, because Austin leans very left. So we have to fight on all of those fronts, whether it's a president or backwards Republicans who want to take us back.
Well, James, and a point to that, the thing about it is Democrats do a better job of fighting one another than they do fighting the real enemy. There's a lot of infighting, and the Democrats have done. I've always contended that the Democratic Party is anti-Black men, and I have a problem with the way they have used their resources for Black men running for Senate, running for any position. When you think about who fuels anything that happens in our community, it's the Black press that puts it to the forefront and makes folks a household name. And that is including when Senator Barack Obama, and he even talked about that at an NABJ convention, how the Black press was there for him all the while when he was a senator and before that, and how he was going to be there for the Black press as president. That's another show. However, still, I can't emphasize enough the importance of what we are going to have to do with the Black press. We have strong commentaries from people across the country, and I don't want to put any more on Dr. Chavis's plate, but he is such a wealth of knowledge, and he walks into the room. He doesn't have to say, I'm Dr. Chavis with such and such, because the work was there before he got there. And that's a point that I want to make, because we talked about, and on the show you talked about Carolyn Bryant, and you talked about being on the right side of history. You have all of these Republicans who are not on the right side of history, but we're writing that history now. We have to make sure we call the names. Yes, we remember the Arbery's, we remember the Floyds, but we need to make sure that people remember those other names. Also, that's responsibility. We need to remember those Republicans who continue to vote a certain way to oppress us. And we also have to realize that if you just could imagine if Trump got into office again, he will appoint so many judges probably in the first month. And they're going to be the judges that are going to really turn back the hands of time on us.
Well, just to bring it full circle as we wind down some of the comments, just wanted to bring up some of those text messages that was sent to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and to the president at the time. He urged, Donald Trump Jr. says, quote, he's got to condemn this ASAP. Cheney, also Liz Cheney, she read aloud from a text from Trump Jr. again. The Capitol Police tweet is not enough, he said. I'm pushing it hard, and I agree, Meadows replied, according to the text messages that she read. She read another one from Laura Ingraham, which said the president needs to tell people in the Capitol to go home. He is destroying his legacy. Sean Hannity got in on the act. He texted and said, can he make a statement? Ask people to leave the Capitol. Mm-hmm. So all of his allies and his biggest allies, Fox News, their biggest personalities are texting the president, texting Mark Meadows, get him to say something, get him to stop this. Can he do something? And he flat out refused to do anything. Dr. Chavis, you have the last word.
Well, I think the reason why the president refused to act because he initiated the whole thing. You have to understand what happened on January the 6th was planned on November the 4th. And they carried it out systematically. And now that January 6th, there's an attempt to rewrite history, to revise history. And the mainstream press is definitely complicit. You know, that's why I'll go back to Chairman Benny Thompson again. Thank God that Nancy Pelosi appointed Benny Thompson to chair the Select Committee. You can rest assured they're going to do everything that's in their constitutional power to bring former President Trump to justice.
Yeah, and just a quick question for everyone, just 10-second answer. Does the U.S. Attorney General Garland, do you think he possesses or has, well, I'll put it this way, does he have the guts to prosecute Donald Trump? Cheryl?
Yes.
James?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
So everybody says Garland does. So that remains to be seen. We will see it. Some breaking news, some sad, and kind of weird breaking news this morning before we close. Frankie Little, well, many may not know the name, but he was a founding member of the OJs, guitarist, and he was a songwriter. Well, in 1982, he disappeared, and police had declared him dead. Well, now, just this morning, or late last night, I should say, his remains were identified. Yes, he did die in 1982, but it is a homicide investigation now. A worker at an old store found a bag with his remains, a skull that showed blunt force trauma. Frankie Little died at the time he was 26 years old. A really, really strange case that's unfolding. The OJs have released a statement saying that they are hoping to get closure for the family, and hoping that whoever is responsible is brought to justice. We'll continue to follow that story, and you can read about it at blackpressusa.com. It's on the NMPA's Newswire, and all of our papers now can run that story. The NMPA's Midwinter Training Conference kicks off January 19th. And as you know, those who've been watching the show will be at the Diplomat Beach Resort in Hollywood, Florida through the 22nd of January, where the theme is the publishing industry, advancing the Black press of America, reaffirming, engaging, and empowering. All are welcome. Our first in-person conference in more than 2 years. Visit www.nmpa-events.com to register and reserve your hotel room. It is going to be a great week, folks. Come out and join us. And hey, come on the show as well. We're going to be live there. So we'll have you come on and join us. Our Black fact this morning, Black newspaper fact. Founded in 1888 by the Reverend Taylor Nightingale, the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight is where co-owner and editor Ida B. Wells established herself as an anti-lynching crusader. After Ida B. Wells in 1892 wrote an editorial expressing skepticism for public justifications of lynchings, such as to protect white womanhood, white newspapers called for retaliation and a mob destroyed the newspaper's office. In response, Ida B. Wells published Southern Horrors, her groundbreaking investigation of lynching in the United States. Our history, Black newspaper history, world history. Let it be known, the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow.